Hello, I'm Geraldine and these are my novel opinions. Today I'm going to go through the books that I read in May 2026. Now, life happened quite a lot in May, nothing terrible but nothing particularly brilliant either. So at the first half of the month I was prevented from reading as much as I would normally do. However, I made up for that because in the last half of the month I was on jury duty. Now, I'm not supposed to talk about what happened on jury duty, but I can't really because I wasn't selected for any trials in the end, which did mean that there was an awful lot of hanging around, and I more than made up for the reading time that I'd lost in the first half of the month. So I ended up reading 6 books in May, and let's get straight on to the first one. The first book I read was Flashlight by Choi. This is an emotional family saga that takes us from the Japanese occupation of Korea, more or less to the present day. We start off by following Sirk, who is born in Japan to Korean parents. And when he grows up, he moves to America, where he marries an American woman and they have a daughter. And in due course, they move back to Japan for Sirk's job. And the action starts when one evening Sirk and his daughter Louisa are having a walk along the beach, and something happens. They don't return, so there's a search party and they find Louisa, the daughter, close to death, but no sign of Sirk. And as Louisa recovers, she gives contradicting explanations as to what happened on the beach. From then on, we not only find out what did happen to Sirk, but also we follow his wife and daughter as they go through the rest of their lives without Sirk. There's a lot in this book. It's what happens to Sirk is based on some real incidents that really did happen. And that's quite interesting. It's something that I knew nothing about. But also it has other themes as well, just general trauma of losing a family member in unusual circumstances where you just don't know what happened to them. But also there's some disability representation. Sirk's wife, I think her name was Anne, she's ill, and for many years she was just gaslit by the medical profession. I suppose we can't really call it gaslighting because they were just dismissing her problems as all in her head when actually she was genuinely ill. Overall, I did enjoy this book very much. I always like books that teach me about parts of history that I had no knowledge of beforehand, and it certainly does that. But it was not unqualified. I didn't find any of the characters particularly sympathetic. Sirk is a very angry man, and I don't really think he has reason to be. His wife Anne is quite unpleasant, and although you can see why she could be very frustrated with her medical condition, especially considering how long it took her to get a diagnosis, she was quite spiky before that as well. And Louisa, the daughter, is just irresponsible, and although that's largely forgivable while she's a teenager, she seemed to carry it on into adulthood. And also the whole thing, I didn't really feel hung together particularly well. It's a family saga, but the stories of Anne and Louisa getting on with their lives without Sirk obviously didn't really connect with what was going on with Sirk because there was no connection. And for me, that made it feel not like a family saga and more like 2 or 3 separate stories, and they didn't seem relevant to each other. It's also quite a long book, and it is too long. It could have been edited. There are large whole chapters that could have been cut out, I feel. And I always find it a little bit exhausting when I read a book where you get page after page with no paragraph breaks. It makes me feel like it's a slog to read it. However, as I say, overall, I did really enjoy it. And given the shortlist that we have with the Women's Prize, I think it's probably my pick to win. Obviously, I have books that I enjoyed more that didn't make it onto the shortlist. As I've said before, Gloria Don't Speak would have been my absolute far and away number one. And also A Guardian and a Thief would have been a top pick for me as well. But given the shortlist that we have, I think my favourite would be Flashlight. The next book I read was Don't Laugh at Other People's Sex Lives by Nao-Cola Yamazaki. So I'm trying to get that out of the shine. There we go. It's very short, little novella. It's very sweet. I'm going to put it down because otherwise my arm will drop off. It's comparing early love with that of people who are a little bit more experienced, without in any way poking fun at the inexperienced. You know, we all go through it. And it's about a young male student who has an affair with his older married teacher. We see all of the action through the eyes of the student, which can make it a little bit difficult sometimes to interpret the thoughts and actions of the teacher. But gradually we start to see clues that this might be a little bit darker than it initially appears, and that the actions of the teacher are possibly a little more predatory than the student initially realises. I can't really say an awful lot without spoilers because it's such a short novel, but I did enjoy it. It is very sweet. And hello, Major Benji. The ending, or should I say what the ending? No, the ending isn't what it first appears. Shall I say that if you think about it? I think that's all I'm going to say about that, because otherwise I will give away a little bit too much. But yes, it is a very sweet little novella, and I can recommend it. I should also add that I happen to be in Herne Hill, so I popped into Herne Hill Books, which I can highly recommend. It's a teeny tiny little bookshop, but it's got a very good selection, and this is the one that I came away. I hadn't heard of it before when I bought it, but it has been on my radar since. The third book I read was The Things We Never Say, the latest by Elizabeth Strout. I was really looking forward to this one, despite it not being an Amgash novel. It's about Archie Dam, a teacher who's going through a bit of an existential crisis, which is leading to some depression. But then he finds out quite a big secret that's been kept from him for decades, and he has to decide how he's going to negotiate his way through life now that he knows this big secret. This is very much Strout fare. It's got her usual, it's got the usual feel of her books. It's as with the Amgash novels, it seems very gentle and quaint on the surface, but there's a lot going on underneath. There's a lot of drama, and again, it's the joys and tragedies that play out in most people's lives, but under an absolute microscope. As I say, this isn't an Amgash novel, and we do know that we're not in Amgash anymore, because there's a little Easter egg hidden away where Strout shows you that this is a completely different universe. I won't say what it is because I don't want to deprive you of the fun of spotting it. This book was slightly different from Strout's other works in a couple of ways. First of all, I found there were fewer likeable or sympathetic characters. Usually all the characters, even if they're unpleasant, they have some little hook that you can find to sympathise with. I found that less so. Even Archie himself, who is a lovely man, but even at times I got frustrated with him and just wished he'd get over himself and get on with things. as suggested by the title, there's a lot in this book about when we should speak up about things and when it would be best not to. This was also similar but different to Lucy by the Sea. In Lucy by the Sea, Strout did a lot of very interesting thinking about. She took characters that she didn't agree with, people who are Trump supporters, anti-maskers, and she didn't excuse them, but she explained possibly why they thought the way they did, and that we should do the same. We shouldn't just immediately dismiss someone because their views are different from ours. In this, there was a bit of that, but it was a lot less politically even-handed. I really got the feeling that Strout was very frustrated by the results of the 2024 American election, and that came out in this book. She tried to be even-handed, but it didn't really work out like that. But overall, I thought this was very much more Strout, and I enjoyed it just as much as I did her previous books. I then moved on to Dominion by Addie E. Citchens. This is a story seen through the eyes of two women who live in a very patriarchal religious community, and we watch as the scales gradually fall from their eyes and they come to realise, what's really going on around them. This is also complicated in part because one of the women is living with a relative privilege in her life. So on the one hand, she's being treated very badly by her husband, but then again, she gets some benefits out of that as well, which clearly she is reluctant to lose, but she's got to weigh up the pros and cons of both. As a reader, I got very frustrated with them, particularly the younger of the two women, about how long it took them to realise that their treatment wasn't acceptable. But gradually, as I carried on, and after I'd finished reading it and I let it sit with me for a while, I realised that that's the point. This is what indoctrination does to people. They don't realise what's going on. It's done gradually. So they gradually accept it. So it did take a long time for them to come round to the idea. It also shows how patriarchal privilege and bad behaviour is passed down through the lines. So the preacher, who is the head of this religious community, is kind of teaching his sons that this is the normal way to behave, and you can see it playing out in the way that they carry on in their relationships. This indoctrination of either being a victim of the patriarchy in this small community, or taking on the entitlement of being a man in it, makes the whole very believable, if a little bit frustrating, and it does shine a light on patriarchal societies like this. I did enjoy the book. As I say, I had to let it sit with me for a while for its message to come through properly, and I think I did appreciate it more after I'd sat and thought about it for a while. A bit more than as soon as I just finished the back page, but it didn't wow me overall. So this isn't one of my top picks for the Women's Prize possible winners. The next book I read was On the Calculation of Volume, Part 4. This is the fourth part of the septology about a woman who's stuck in the same day. She wakes up in the same day over and over again. I'll avoid spoilers for this particular book, but there might be spoilers for earlier parts. So if you haven't started the series yet, you might want to skip ahead. On the surface, this book seems to be about housekeeping and having meetings, But it's what's said at those meetings which is so interesting about this book. It returns to the subject of consumption. Now that there are more people around, it really starts to become apparent how much we consume. They notice it because stocks aren't being replenished. If they buy things from a shop, they don't appear back on the shelves again the next day because it's not the next day and they've already eaten them. So it really means that they have to start being frugal about the way they consume not just food but everything. It's something that probably became apparent to a lot of us during the early days of lockdown, when the supermarket shelves weren't being restocked as quickly as we were emptying them. And it became apparent just how fragile the food supply chain actually is. The book also has a very interesting discussion about frugality. While there were a few people who are stuck in this same day who thought, well, hey, I'll just go out and spend money like water because the money reappears in my bank account and, you know, I can steal things because there won't be any repercussions as long as I don't get caught the same day. But for the most part, people did find it very easy to be frugal, not least because once you take one-upmanship out of the equation, because they're all in the same boat, they've all got limitless, more or less, finances. Once you take that one-upmanship out of the equation, then what's the point? Because you might have a flashy sports car, but the person next to you could have one if they wanted. So what's the point, really? They also had an interesting discussion about language. They decided that because they were in a new situation, they needed new words for certain things. And they were trying to decide what those words should be. And they found that it was quite difficult to come to a consensus because they really felt that language needed to reflect the way they felt about certain things. And various people felt in different ways about things. And so it was quite difficult to decide upon a new language for this new universe that they found themselves in. I really enjoyed this book. It's very philosophical, which isn't normally my thing. It's lots of ideas and discussing, which would normally bore the pants off me, but I found it absolutely fascinating. And I won't say anything about the ending, but I've pre-ordered part 5. The last book I read in May was Celestial Lights by Cecile. This is the story of a man who becomes an astronaut and becomes the first human to set foot on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. But it's not sci-fi. It's much more about how we juggle our responsibilities and ambitions, and the compromises and losses that can come out of that. There's lots about looking both outwards and inwards. This is illustrated by the fact that he's an astronaut, but his wife, I've forgotten what her job is. She's an academic, but it involves her looking down microscopes a lot. And of course that's reflected in his responsibilities, on the one hand to his job and his bosses, but on the other to his family. He's got a small son, and the mission to Europa is going to be a 10-year mission. So which comes first, his responsibility to his career to go on this 10-year mission, or to his family because he will be abandoning them for 10 years. Some people have not liked the main character in this because of the decisions that he makes. I think that's a little bit unfair. I think we do have to juggle these decisions, and there will always be compromises to be made. I'm not saying that I thought his decisions were always right, and that I always agreed with him, but I think it's all a little bit more complicated than some people have thought. But I really enjoyed it. I loved her book, Cecile Pin's book, Wandering Souls. So when I saw that she'd written another one, I snapped it up. So yes, I was very glad that I read this, and yes, I can highly recommend it. That's all my books for May. I have already started and finished my first June book. That was As If by Isabel Waidner. I will let you know more about that next month when I see you for my June wrap up. So I hope you have a good month until then, and I will see you then. Bye.